Hey guys, in this lesson, we're going to take a look at how to do some simple animation in Flash. This form of animation is called tweening, and it basically allows us to set down one or more points and then have Flash animate in between those points. It can save a lot of time, and it's actually just really useful to use, especially in conjunction with more complex animations that you'll be doing later on. So let's get started by opening up a new document, and we'll go through the 3 different tweening types. So first, just click on ActionScript 3.0 in your splash screen column here. And then we can get started. To start off, we're going to first look at classic and motion tweens. Now, motion tween has become more of the standard between the two. However, I still find myself using classic tween quite a bit, mainly because that's how I started using Flash. It's been just kind of the method I've used the most. I also use the method in my other tutorial series on how to create an animated cartoon. So I'll show you the method. You can look at it, and if you want to use it in the future, great. If not, you don't have to. It never hurts to learn more. The one thing to keep in mind is that whenever you do a classic or motion tween, you need to have your object be a symbol. And we learned about symbols in the last lesson, so this shouldn't be too hard. First, let's go over here to the shape tool on our toolbar, and then hold down the mouse button and grab an oval. Now in your properties inspector, you can change the color and the stroke color or size if you choose to. So I'll just change it to red so it's easier to see. And I can just bump up the stroke a little bit here. Now just come over to the stage and draw out your oval. Next, we want to convert it to a symbol. And the easiest way to do this would be to highlight your layer by going down here and just clicking on your first frame of your layer, and it will highlight the entire object then. And then just hit F8 on your keyboard to convert the symbol. Now we'll name the symbol oval, and it can be either a movie clip or a graphic. We'll just set it to a graphic for right now. Once you do that, click OK. Now, classic tween works by setting up a series of points. Keyframes, actually. What you'll do is you'll plot down your keyframes, and then you will put the tween in, and then Flash will do the rest. So, come down here on your timeline, and let's go to frame 30. Right-click on frame 30, and insert a keyframe. Now, you'll remember from my frames lesson that keyframes indicate change. So at frame 30, we want something to change. In this case, we will move the oval across the screen. So make sure you have your selection tool selected. Come back here to your stage, and on frame 30, let's click and drag the oval somewhere else on the stage. It doesn't really matter what. I'll just put it downward like this and then release. So now, if we go back to frame 1, the oval is in the starting position. Frame 30, it's in the new position. If we click on any of the frames in between, it still appears to be in frame 1. And that's because these frames correspond with the previous keyframe, which is frame 1. Now, we need to insert the tween. And to do this, we simply right-click on frame 1 and create a classic tween. Now, once we do this, you'll notice on the timeline, on this layer here, that we have a different color. It changed to purple, and we also have an arrow. This indicates that there is a tween on this layer. And now, if we thumb through this, you'll notice that all of those frames have been animated for us. Everything has been done in between. And if we go back to frame 1 and hit enter on our keyboard, we can see this play out. Now, just a couple of things to keep in mind. First, your object does need to be a symbol in order for this to work. If it's not a symbol, you won't be able to tween it. Secondly, you can only have one symbol on each layer for this to work. Let's say you had two ovals on this one layer, and then you tried to tween them. It won't work. You have to make sure that you have your layers separated for each tween. So just something to keep in mind. Now let's talk about easing and rotating. Let's click on your first frame of this tween, on frame 1, and then come over here to the Properties Inspector. You'll notice at the top here that we have an area called Ease. What this allows us to do is set up a parameter here so that the shape either speeds up as it moves through its tween path, or it's fast at the beginning and slows down near the end. Because if we play this right now, just by clicking on frame 1 and hitting enter, you'll see that it just plays consistently throughout the animation. But let's go back to frame 1 here, go up to the tweening area, and let's move the ease down to -1 by simply just clicking on it and dragging to the left. Now this is a very extreme ease I just did. There's a lot in between here. -100 is the most extreme you can go in this direction, but it's just for demonstration purposes. So if we go back now to frame 1 and hit enter, you'll see that it starts off slow and then speeds up. So that's what -100 for the ease does. If we go back to frame 1 and go back to the Properties Inspector and then jack this to 100, basically in the other direction by holding down and going to the right, we can now play this again and see that it starts really fast and then slows down. So that is what easing can do for us. And as I said, there's all those in-betweens. You don't have to go to -100 or 100. You can go in between, like to 50 or to 34. So that's something to play around with if you're looking for just something to do with, making your animations look a bit more realistic, or if you just need to add a little bit of easing in or out to your animation. Now let's look at the rotate option. To better demonstrate this, let's make a rectangle for a symbol and tween that. So come down here to your timeline and make a new layer. And then on your toolbar, let's select the rectangle. And we can make this a different color just so it looks different than that of the oval. Now, on frame 1, let's just draw out a rectangle like this. Now let's convert it to a symbol by clicking on our layer and then hitting F8. And then we'll name this one rectangle. We can leave it as a graphic and click OK. Now let's do the same thing by going to frame 30 and right-clicking and inserting a keyframe. Now grab the selection tool, and on frame 30, let's move the object over. In this case, I'll move it up and over so it doesn't intersect much with the oval. Now, insert a tween by coming over to frame 1 and right-clicking and creating a classic tween. Now, on your Properties Inspector, come over here to where it says Rotate. Right now, it's set to Auto. But if we go to the drop-down menu here, we can choose between clockwise or counterclockwise. Let's choose the clockwise option once. You'll notice that when we do this, that there is a number next to it that says ×1. This indicates how many times it rotates within the tween path. So between these 30 frames, we will have the object rotate once. So if we just hit enter on frame 1, you can see that the object automatically rotates. If we go back to frame 1 and go to our properties inspector, we change this to 2 or 3, and then play, you can see that it rotates at a much quicker speed. So those are some options you can play with when it comes to both classic and motion tweening. So just keep those in mind when you're going through with your animations. Now let's move on to the motion tweening process. To begin, let's make a new document so we just have a fresh slate here. So go to File, New, and then select ActionScript 3.0 and click OK. Now let's draw out another shape for the motion tween. So come over here to your toolbar, and I'll just grab an oval again for this demonstration. And you can choose your color and all that if you wish. I'll just come back here to the stage and draw out the oval. And then select it with clicking on my layer. And then hitting F8 on the keyboard. Naming this oval. Choosing it to be a graphic. And click OK. Now, motion tweening acts a little bit differently. You can set up keyframes if you wish by manually inputting them, or what you can do is you can actually just have the keyframes place for you. So to demonstrate this, let's go down to the timeline and extend your frames out to frame 80. So put your cursor at frame 80, right click, and insert frame. Now on frame 1, right click and create a motion tween. You'll notice that your object changes, or your layer changes to blue. This means that it has a motion tween, and you can also see that the layer icon changed as well. Just like the classic tween, you only want one object on each tween layer because it'll just keep things more simple and you'll have better luck with it. So once you do this, let's just try clicking on frame 25. So once you're on frame 25, take your selection tool, come over here to the stage and just drag your object somewhere. Let's just drag it to the right. Once we do this, you'll notice that a green line appears. This is the path that your oval is on. And you'll notice now that there is a keyframe on the layer. So basically you can just kind of move through here, go to frame 40, move the object where you want it, and it'll insert a keyframe. Try moving your object to frame 55 once. Come over here to your toolbar and select the free transform tool and then enlarge the object. You'll do the same thing. As you go through here, you'll see now it gets bigger as you go along the path. So there's many different ways you can tween. And the motion tweening really allows you to just have more control over it, and it just makes it easier. You can just kind of plop it down and go. You can move your object where you want it without having to manually input all those keyframes. Now, there's a couple of other things we can do with this as well. First of all, if I take my selection tool, you can come over here to the paths, let's say this first path, for instance, and click and drag up or downward to create an arc in the path. So now when the object moves, it moves on that arc. So you can really easily change the way the object moves with a simple switch of the selection tool and just, a little tweaking on the stage on that end. You can also adjust the duration in points. So if I clicked on this end point here and dragged it like this, I can drag how the last part of that tween takes effect. I can drag how far it's going to go, how fast it's going to go. If I make it really short, it's going to go pretty quick there near the end. I can adjust the direction and so on. So the motion tweening is very much more visual for you as far as how you tween things out. Now, motion tweening also gives you more control over all the little aspects of the tween. And this is all done through the motion editor, which you will find sharing space with your timeline. So if you come down here to the bottom and click on the motion editor tab, you're brought up with a bunch of different looking things here. And if I scroll my bar all the way here to the left, we can see the start of this tween. And you can see here that on the side here, we have the X and Y positions of the object. And right here is frame 1. And we can even scroll through here, frame 2, frame 3, frame 4, frame 5, and so on, see the results up here and adjust accordingly to this graph. So the higher the graph, the more positive the X is. And we can go in here and adjust this. Like, oh, I don't want it to move that far right away. And you can see as I'm adjusting this, it adjusts the graph or the motion paths up there completely. It just gives you more control. And so you're basically working with your own mini timeline here. You have another timeline to work with within this motion tween. And you can come down here now to transformation. We could skew the object. We could just adjust this accordingly if we wanted to do that. And we can move it up, down, and as you can see here, we're skewing the object as we do this. So it's just something that you can play around with definitely when working on your tweens here. And there's other stuff you can do here too, like color effects, filters. You can scale it, which we did on the stage itself with the 3 transform tool, but you can also do that with the graphs as well. So definitely check out the motion editor if you're using motion tweening, because it gives you much more control and it allows you to go in and just tweak with those little details that you might not be able to do on the stage. Finally, let's take a look at shape tweening. So let's make a new document for this. So let's go to File, New, ActionScript 3.0, and click OK. First, let's bring back our timeline just by clicking on the Timeline tab on the bottom of our screen here. Next, let's make another shape. So come over here to your Oval tool. And again, you can select your color and your stroke size if you choose to. And then come over here to the stage and let's just click and drag and create a pretty decent sized oval for the stage, about like that. Now, let's go to about frame 50 on the timeline and right click and insert a keyframe. Now, a couple of notes here. Shape tweening, you don't want a symbol. It's basically the opposite of the classic and classic and motion tweening. You don't want a symbol because it won't work if you have a symbol. Secondly, it acts similar to that of the classic tween, and where you manually put down a point and then you insert the shape tween and then Flash does the rest of the work for you. So on frame 30, let's take the selection tool and then come over here to the oval and let's just click and drag to morph it out. Remember, we can do this with the selection tool. So let's just kind of go through here and just reshape this to be something completely different. Come in here and just move some things around. Now, go back to frame 1, right click, and create shape tween. When you do this, your layer changes to green, your frames change to green, and you now have a line. Again, very similar to how the classic tween was set up. But if we page through here, you can see that our object morphs as we go through. Just like, when we pulled it out of place, Flash takes all those frames in between and animates them so that it pulls out of place. So if we go back to frame 1 and hit enter, we can see this take shape. So that's basically what shape tweening does for us. And so again, it has its uses. It just depends on what you're animating and what you're doing. Now, be careful when using it though, because if you get very complex with your shapes, it can be finicky. It sometimes doesn't work right. You know, you have to use it kind of sparingly. You have to kind of use your judgment when working with it. So that is how you shape tween. Anyway, to wrap this up, those are the three basic types of tweening. The classic tween, while old, is still useful in some cases if you still think in keyframes rather than just moving it around like motion tweening. But both have their uses, and you can choose which one you want to use, or you can use both. It doesn't matter. And shape tweening allows us to morph the shapes of objects. Just make sure that you don't have them as symbols when you do this. But remember to keep your symbols for the classic and motion tweens. Anyway, next time we'll be taking a look at filters and color effects. So I'll see you guys then.